I'm so excited to be here today, joined by Grammy Award-winning composer Tobias Picker as part of the Marshall Opera Oral History Project, which has the mission to collect, preserve, and disseminate the stories of seasoned and distinguished living composers. It's an incredible honor to interview Tobias Picker, one of America's leading contemporary composers who is referred to as our finest composer for the lyric stage by the Wall Street Journal. Born in New York City to an accomplished fashion designer, painter, and inventor, Henriette Simon Picker, and news writer Julian Picker, Tobias has drawn commissions and performances by the world's leading musicians, orchestras, and opera houses, including the Metropolitan Opera, Covent Garden, San Francisco Opera, Santa Fe Opera, LA Opera, Dallas Opera, New York City Opera, San Diego, the list goes on, English touring opera, many others. And his symphonic works with the BBC Proms, Chicago Symphony, Cleveland Orchestra, Helsinki Philharmonic, New York Philharmonic, Philadelphia Orchestra, the San Francisco Symphony, and that's to name a few. The New Yorker has called him a genuine creator with a fertile, unforced vein of invention. And this was spoken about his 1978 premiere of Rhapsody for Violin and Piano, when Tobias was just 24 years old, if I'm getting that right mathematically.
24.
And BBC Music Magazine described him as displaying a distinctively soulful style that is one of the glories of the current music scene. So it's quite an honor to be speaking with you and your incredible legacy. I'll say a bit more. His operas have been commissioned by Santa Fe Opera, which was Emmeline in 1996, LA Opera with Fantastic Mr. Fox in 98, Dallas Opera, Thérèse Raquin, if I'm saying that right, 2001, the Metropolitan Opera with An American Tragedy in 2001, San Francisco Opera with Dolores Claiborne in 2013, and most recently, Opera Theater of St. Louis with Awakenings in 2022. He has an upcoming premiere of his most recent opera, Lily Elbe, at the St. Gallen Theater in Switzerland on October 22nd of this year, and I'm very excited to get to know more about that later. So let's see, without further ado, we can jump right in. I would just love to start by getting to know, what inspired you to first start composing at the age of 8, and to know a little bit about your training and your inspiration.
I was inspired by my environment, my heritage, my upbringing. I was brought up in a family that was involved in the arts and very engaged with it. So I was exposed to music and art at a very early age, and I can't remember a time when I didn't think of myself as a composer. So I can point to certain moments that were important when I was 8. I wrote Giancarlo Menotti a letter, the composer of The Medium and Among the Night Visitors, because every year on television, in those days network television, broadcast operas, I would watch Among the Night Visitors, and it turned out that he lived fairly close to where I grew up, and so I wrote him a letter and he answered me, and I met him some years later. I think Amal was having live opera on TV. So it was only once a year that Amal was on, but I look forward to it every year. Was one of the things that kind of catalyzed me and made me aware that there was such a thing as a living composer. I also being taken to the Leonard Bernstein Young People's Concerts when I was 9. In particular, I was present for Andre Watts's debut. at, in 1963, and being close to Bernstein. I watched, it was on television every Saturday, the young people's concerts. So I watched them every week, but then I got to go and attend one. That was a big deal. So there were various things like that happened in my childhood that I think inspired me. Hearing Kurt Weill when I was a very young child, all the time my parents played it in the house. So I knew Lotte recordings when I was 3 or 4. Well, so, and again, I don't remember not when I didn't know them. And so I would say it was a product of my environment, and it's all about exposure and education, and then I think, well, talent, I suppose, but I ascribe to the old adage that talent is 99% perspiration and 1% inspiration. So in order to be inspired as a composer, I was taught at an early age that I had to work very hard every day to learn my craft, and that it would take a long time before I could express myself, and that wasn't really the point of creating. It was to convey something that was bigger than myself, more important than my self-expression, and that after years of life experience and work experience, that I might have something, I might then, by then at some point, have a self to express too. So it's hard to keep oneself out of one's work, but to the extent that my early work shows that, I think that Bruce is born out.
Wonderful. Interesting. And in terms of, you were mentioning, self-expression, I'm just curious, which work is most near and dear to your heart as being, if you could, maybe you can't just choose one, but I guess I'm just curious, in terms of your compositional legacy, is there one that really resonates with you as being a profound kind of centering of yourself in your work?
Well, they're all, everything one writes is autobiographical to some extent, and everything that I've done, I would say it is. So as I said earlier, it's after a certain point, it's hard to keep oneself out of it, but I don't really think it's possible to say that I have a favorite. It's like asking me if I have a favorite composer. It's not there. Or who is the greatest composer? What's the greatest opera? Who's the greatest pianist? There is no such thing. It's at a certain, after reaching a certain level, everyone is just different. That's all.
Mm.
And the operas that I've written are all products of my maturity. So the first one I wrote, Emmeline, I was 40, 41, or it was 42 when it premiered. Yeah. So I'd already written a great deal of chamber music, orchestral music, symphonies, concerti. So each of my operas is in my mature period. I didn't write any juvenilia operas. Rossini, I don't know how many operas he'd written by the time he was 11, but he was, he just turned them out from the time he came out of the womb. But I started as a mature composer writing operas, so I would say that they're all mature works. Emmeline, but I was the first. There's always I guess it's an some kind of attachment one has to one's firstborn. But I've always been the most interested in whatever opera I or piece of music I'm writing at the moment or working on at the moment. And right now I'm developing a new piece, but I'm not composing it yet. So right now I'm most interested in Lily Elba, and it's now the most important piece of mine to me. Certainly, if I were writing a violin concerto now, I think that would probably also be the most important piece to me at the moment. Looking back, I really can't. I can't assess them very objectively, and so there's now 7. So each one is a different world.
Mm. Well, since you're in the midst of Lily Elbe right now, would you mind to share more about what inspired you to write and create that story and just more about it?
Well, Lily Elba was a painter who lived in Denmark with her wife Gerda Wegner around the turn of the century, 20th century, and she was very well known as a landscape painter, and later but later gave up painting when she transitioned. She was one of the first people to undergo gender affirmation surgery, and it's almost 100 years ago in Germany. Well, in the world, but it took place in Germany, and so she is a pioneer of modern day people who are trans, and I met Lucia Lucas a number of years ago when I was casting an opera. I was casting a new opera I was going to do, which I'd abandoned, but that required trans singers to be in it. But I did cast her as Don Giovanni because I was at that time artistic director of the Tulsa Opera, and she made her American stage debut, professional stage debut as Don Giovanni, and as 2018 or 19 at the Tulsa Opera. As such, the first woman that I know of to sing the role of Don Giovanni since it was written. She's a held in baritone. So out of our friendship, and because I'd initially wanted to hear her sing for an opera that would be written for her, I asked her if she would be interested in having an opera written for her and playing the lead, Lilielba. And she very much wanted to do that. So it and so it was, and so it is.
Amazing.
And she's in rehearsal now and in St. Gallen with a marvelous cast and a new production by Christian Mata, which Modestus Petrenius is conducting, and with the oldest opera theater in Switzerland. So it's happening, but this is 5-6 years in the since the initial idea till today.
Wow, wonderful. Well, I'm sure that premiere is going to be amazing. So thank you for sharing that with us.
I'm excited about it. It's the first opera that's ever been written about a person who's trans, or an opera singer who's trans. So I'm it just happened, it's happened to be this way. But when I learned about her story, Lilielba, I just thought this is just her life is very operatic, and in all of the right ways. And then wanting to work with Lucia on a new piece just made it all kind of fall into place without going into an encyclopedia of details.
And the libretto was written by your husband, right?
Yes, Alize Francheska, who wrote the libretto for Awakenings as well, which was just released on Beamoff Records. We recorded it in the studio recording of it in Boston in February, and this is his second libretto. Yeah, he's working on a new one, and so that we hope to do. So we'll see.
Wonderful. It must be really incredible to collaborate together these works.
We know each other quite well after 43 years.
Imagine so. Probably that process is very rewarding then.
It's yes, it can be. It's creating an opera together is it's quite something. He's a writer. I mean, he was an accomplished writer before he wrote Awakening, his first novel was published actually the same, just around the time Emmeline was premiered at Santa Fe, and he won a lot of awards. Won the Lambda Literary Award, and um, he was already recognized as an important Jewish writer, one of the new generation of Jewish writers in the tradition of Malamud. So he's also a physician, specializing in the brain, and he but also other organs. So he's very well suited to in both of these subjects, because his medical knowledge with awakening was very, very important, and his medical knowledge working with people who are trans on their cases as a physician also has been enormously helpful.
Amazing. Very cool. So thinking about opera, because this is martial opera, I wanted to ask you, and you've shared a little bit about composing for opera, but what in your mind makes writing for opera special? Like, what sets it apart? What drew you to it? I know you mentioned Menotti when you were young, but is there something special that you feel can be expressed in opera? What's your take on it?
Well,
Or what do you love most about it, I guess?
To me, opera is it's a genre which is one of many genres that I've worked in as a composer in my career. But it's the king in a way of art form, I guess, until film became, in the 20th century, when film became the new art form of the 20th century. Probably the only new one. Opera was incorporated the most every other art form in it, and it still was a work of music theater. So it was always something I worked toward as a composer, to be able to one day write an opera, because it involves so many different disciplines and fields that I needed to learn how to write for the orchestra before I could even think about writing an opera. I needed to learn how to write for the voice before I could think about writing an opera, because I also needed to learn about theater. I am still, of course, I'm still learning every day about the voice, about theater, about the stage, and about the orchestra. It's not something that you can achieve a mastery of it, but you never stop learning or improving your ability to create in these different fields. That I think opera is it's the most social of musical forms, So when, as you know, as a singer, you're rehearsing an opera, it's like it's like you go into, it's like you have this family that you work with for a period of time, and you you might even, each time you make new friends that some of whom stay with you for life, in many instances. So it's the it's the sense of, I think, family, of which is such a basic core human need that draws us to this art form. Lots of other things too, but uh, I think it boils down to our our need for family, for siblings, um, parents, children, whatever one's need is. Opera kind of is there to fulfill it.
Hmm.
And I would say that also on Lily Elba, um, it's a love story, uh, and it's a it's a traditional opera in many ways, but it also has a message, and as think I think most operas do. They have many messages, but one of the messages that I want to get across and for the audience to feel is that we are all siblings, that uh, everyone is in this together. Um, Gandhi said, all men are brothers," but that's a little bit. It's a little. Uh, it sounds a little one-sided binary today.
Mm.
But what I think he means is that we're all siblings,
Mm.
brothers and sisters.
That's beautiful. I love the way you describe opera as being like a family, and I can certainly relate to that as well. But that's amazing that it's there to serve every need because of all the different people involved and facets, right? It's incredible. Wow, very
I think
cool.
that's why that's why we love doing it.
Yeah. And why there'll always be a place for opera, in America and in the world, right? Even when we're at this crazy time after the pandemic, companies are changing, things are changing so quickly in our world, with technology and, you know, for all of the life that you've lived and that you've been, your experiences in this industry. I mean, I guess what I want to ask is what do you want to say to future composers and future generations working in opera and classical music? If you could share with them, you know, anything.
Well, mm, the operas that survive are well are genuinely universal in their themes, but what makes them, I think, important in whatever time we're living is that they're all also connected to the time, our time, the time we live in. And to understand operas of the past, I think it's important to understand the time that they were written in, to really understand Todesstaat, for instance. You need to know that it was written right after the First World War, and what people were going through, and why that, and then when you understand what was going on in people's emotional lives, you understand why Farnborough wanted to tell that story, because it's it by in I think out of context it might be difficult to understand. Still, you don't really have to know the context to be able to revel in the luxurious musical house that he builds for you, and just be completely swept under by it. For example,
Mm. Yeah, so it's all about that expressing the human experience in our current time. And opera is one of the incredible ways to do that. Mm.
you
Very interesting the way that you share, your perspective on this. And yeah, just I had other questions too, but you've shared so much that sort of encapsulates your life and your, what's important to you in philosophically. But, you know, I guess, is there anything else that you would want to share? I mean, I wanted to know about, what you feel like your legacy is, or do you have do you think that you have one specific piece that's kind of your legacy, but you've already said, it's all kind of about where you are in life at that time, and just it's like that journey, right? As you grow as a human, your work changes, right?
all my legacy, as for musically, I have my catalog is my legacy. It's a fairly large catalog.
Yeah.
I and so I identify uh, as an American composer, as a composer first, as an American composer, but also as a Jewish composer. And I don't, I haven't talked about it very much. And I've kept it pretty much to myself, but I do. And actually, I started out in this chat we're having talking about a composer who was a refugee of Hitler's Germany, who came to America and found a safe haven. Kurt Weill was an enormous influence on me, and Korngold, another uh, Jewish emigre, uh, who I forget what year he came to America, but he couldn't have stayed in Germany or Austria or Europe. And certainly he got out in time, but I think that part of my legacy, I hope, is that I'm a Jewish American composer, or an American composer who happens to be Jewish. And there are not a lot of composers in America writing operas who are Jewish. There are not a lot of Jews in America, contrary to what some people may think. We're a very tiny percentage of the population. Tiny. I don't know. 3, 4, 5, 6%, something like that. So yeah, so it's part of my heritage. It's part of my upbringing. Part of the tradition, the push and pull of in my family's history of religion versus the arts, culture versus religion. It's all kind of part of the composition that is me. I'd also say that I mean, it's incidental in a way, but as someone who's neurodivergent, and I say that because I have Tourette syndrome, and it's been something that it has been a struggle I've had to deal with my whole life. Everything that I've accomplished in music has been, I've been able, it's been kind of a way of triumphing over this burden. And I would tie that in with survival, that I've created this body of work, and you know, I've survived. I've not had to survive the kind of adversity that a lot of people have had to in order and still create, but there's been a little.
It's really an inspiration to hear you, speak about that. And I'm sure, I imagine that you inspire others by sharing that as well. Music has been a way to express yourself, or I guess, what would you say music serves for you in a personal sense, in a way, as being your outlet? I mean,
I think in music, so it's hard to step outside of one's own thoughts, but I tend to think in music, and it's always in my head.
Hmm.
As I think when it is with so many musicians, it's just always there. It's just a part of our brain, a part of our makeup, a part of our soul.
Hmm. Is it hard for you to write down one idea as another one's already taking over your brain? Are you able to focus in enough to get it down on paper pretty easily?
Nothing's easy.
Nothing's easy. Fair enough.
Nothing really worth doing is easy, is it?
Yeah. Hmm. Well, thank you so much. It's been really wonderful to speak with you. Um, I'm
Very
sure
nice to speak with you.
I'm sure everyone will really appreciate and enjoy, what you've shared today, listening to you share from a personal perspective.
Thank you. I'm hoping that it doesn't put everyone to sleep, but it might be a good way to, if you have trouble sleeping, to fall asleep, listening to my slow bass voice.
No, I think it's just it was riveting, really, just listening to you and kind of being with your thoughts there, and really, allowing you to speak candidly, from someone who's had such a rich life of work and amazing accomplishments. I mean, like, I found it just so interesting to hear from you. So thank you.
Good. My
Thank you.
pleasure.
And I'm sure everyone else will agree. So thank you. All
Good luck
right.
with it. Okay,
Thank
my
you.
pleasure.
Thank you so much for your time.
Pleasure.
Have a great production.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.